Good afternoon and welcome to another week of Gript's weekly live stream. Don't know why I stumbled over that. I am Gary Kavanagh, the deputy editor of Gript, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Fatima McGregor. Fatima, how are you doing this week?
Not bad. We were going to say our lively week stream because that would
You see, this is why I'm a writer and I don't like doing live streams or podcasts, despite the fact I've done so many of them. I stumble over my own words and I just end up talking about nothing at all, which I'm sure is an enjoyable experience for the listener, as I'm doing right now.
Yeah, I have a habit of swapping the first letter of words. So if I'm talking about like Ben and Megan, I'll say men and Began. It's highly embarrassing. But yes, it has been a busy week. I am currently slightly under the weather, so I apologize if I am more nasal and rambly than usual. I hope people will be forgiving.
Perfect. So we'll get cracking into it. Just a comment for those who haven't watched any of these before. We can see your comments as they come in, whatever platform you're in. So if you have any questions or comments or things you want read out, send them over. I'm not going to promise we'll get to some of them based on time and quality of comment. But yeah, if you want any follow-on on something or just say hello, send it over and we'll get cracking. I suppose to start, Fan, there's a load of stuff we want to go through. The guards' call in relation to citizen journalists recording them. Some of the stuff about McGregor and Tucker Carlson. But I wanted to start with the recent story from the UK Supreme Court that came out yesterday. Now, that was a very big case in relation to transgender issues. So I don't know how much you've been following the issues kind of with this in the UK, from the Cass report to some of the cases we've seen previously, Fatima. Have you been keeping up to date with it, or?
I know, I think it was last year in particular, I did quite a lot of reporting on the transgender issue. I think this year I've been more focused on legal issues, but I am aware of the Cass report and the recommendations it made, and the disgracing of Tavistock and the fallout from that, and the moving away from the NHS following the affirmative model of care, where they just basically like banged kids on puberty blockers. And if you come in and say you believe you're born in the wrong body, they'd be like, okay. They won't ask you why that is.
Yeah, I think the UK, well, what we've seen in the UK with some of the cases has been kind of devastating to transgender activists. The Tavistock case, now for those who don't know, the Tavistock clinic was a clinic that dealt with childhood transition mostly. And in Ireland, we had been sending children over there for to be seen, and they got brought to court by in the Bell case. And it turned out that they were not being run terribly well. There was an incredible amount of stuff in the judgment where the Tavistock was asked for basic information about the children that they were seeing, about comorbidities, as in, did they have any other issues, mental health issues or things like that. And the Tavistock basically just had to keep saying, we don't collect that information, we don't have that information, we know nothing about that. And it looked horrendously bad for them. But that's kind of culminated in what we've seen now, which is a UK Supreme Court ruling saying that when you consider the Equality Act, that when it says woman, it means a biological female. It does not mean a transgender woman. If you get a gender recognition cert in the UK, you are not a woman under this law. So basically now in the UK, as a matter of law, transgender women are not women. It is purely if you are a born biological female. And that's going to have some really big impacts, I think, over here as well, because we were sending children over there. Now we have a case being brought in Ireland itself about whether or not it's appropriate to send women over there. The clinician Donal O'Shea has brought that case. So it looks like a lot of this stuff is coming to a kind of legal dead end. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes, because we have one of the most liberal gender recognition laws in existence that I'm aware of. You can basically, I remember going through what you needed before to change gender in Ireland, and it's frankly, it's easier than opening a bank account. So I don't think that's going to go well. And while obviously this is a different country, Irish courts do pay attention to what's going on in the UK, but also these cases have made activists stand and give arguments rather than the usual line, which is, well, if you don't support us, you support the suicide of trans children. and that was being very powerful for them. And then it turns out when they actually have to stand up and explain it in front of a judge in just a logical, just straightforward fashion, kind of collapses fairly rapidly.
Yeah, I think a lot of this stuff, these kind of luxury beliefs, they really don't have any power to stand up to scrutiny. And like you just said, in circumstances where a lot of the activists pushing for this have gotten out of having to defend themselves in any kind of a logical way by just calling people bigots and transphobes and like, whatever other name they can think of. They haven't had practice. Like they have not have had practice in defending these arguments that they're making. And I don't know how they could, frankly, because they are just essentially made up.
Yeah, I mean, in Ireland, they have the advantage that, the Gender Recognition Act is pushed through after the marriage equality decision, and there's a lot of backroom dealing there to get that through. Um, and there's very little conversation about it. And then the activists are heavily funded by the state over here. I mean, nearly entirely funded by the state in some cases. So it's a slightly different scenario, but we seem to be seeing this across a lot of the Western world. A lot of things were claimed about these surgeries, about these transitions. Now we're starting to get research, and it turns out that most of the claims are absolutely false, and it seems to be going against it quite nicely. But I just wanted to open by mentioning that because that's a bit of news that people might not have heard because it's abroad. But Fatima, I did want to give you a chance to go through an article that you published there yesterday. Now, this was in relation to one of the Garda groups coming out and saying that they wanted more done to deal with, I think the phrase was citizen journalists who were videotaping them and putting it up online. And basically there was a claim that was leading to harassment. I know you wrote on this. My understanding was that there are already laws in place that the guards can use if someone is interfering with them during their duties. So why do they need these laws? Why can't they? If someone is recording you but not interfering with you, what's the problem? Is that the case, or what exactly are they calling for?
I think that the calls they've been made in a slightly perhaps awkward fashion where I believe that they wanted to focus on people who, or maybe they didn't, but it seems like the kind of the point that they put on the spear was people who go up like just right in their face with a phone and just right in their face, like literally like this. I've seen it, and start berating them and just harassing them in the line of their duty. And I have seen that happen, but I don't think it's fair to say at all that a majority or even a substantial minority of people I've seen at protests are doing that. What I've seen was like, one or two people who, the general atmosphere in the crowd was that they were not really welcome at the protest doing things like that. But going back to the legislation, there is a provision, as you mentioned, it's the Criminal Justice Act 2006, section 15.6, section 15.6, sorry, I apologize. It's written correctly in my article, but it does allow for a member of An Garda Síochána to arrest someone who is interfering in the course of their duty. And not only can they be arrested, they can be imprisoned. I think it's to a term not exceeding 6 months, as well as being fined €3,000. So in circumstances where that's already law, and I'm not a legal expert, I'm not a Garda, but there doesn't seem to be any obvious impediment to applying that to those circumstances. Because if somebody is in your face with a phone, they're obviously, in my opinion at least, interfering with your ability to do your job.
Hmm.
If nothing else, they're obscuring your vision. And if you're, a member of An Garda Síochána, you have to be watching what's happening at all times. So I think it's very difficult for me to see why they need new laws to handle this.
Yeah, I mean, I read the kind of comments about this, and the immediate thought I had is, okay, well, has there been an uptick in this sort of behavior against the guards? Or is this that some of the footage that came out about the guards last year, particularly in relation to some of the immigration protests, was put up? And I mean, they might say it was edited in a particular way, but I think it would be fair to say some of that footage did not make the guards look particularly good. I know even some of the footage we reviewed of baton charges and things like that. So you could ask real questions about whether or not that force was appropriate, And certain things I think you could argue probably stepped over the line. So, I mean, what's your read on this? Do you think this is behavior against them is becoming worse, or basically they've been embarrassed and they don't want to be embarrassed?
To be fair, I think it might be a bit of both.
Hmm.
I think it, like, the prevalence of everyone having, a high-powered recording device in their pocket at all times, really, it's quite a new phenomenon. Like the prevalence of people engaging in demonstrations and having mobile phones, and like it's almost like the internet in itself, where the people that feel that they are the ones that are entrusted to deliver and like procure evidence are now not really in control of it anymore, because a nanny who knows how to use her video camera on her phone can capture a piece of footage that's as relevant as something that's captured on a Garda body cam, for example. And I think that there probably is, in fairness, an element of gatekeeping in it. I mean, if you see a lot of the footage from Kulak, as you mentioned, they did pepper spray an old woman that was waiting at a bus stop. I
Hmm.
what an old woman, like I just cannot see in any universe what the justification for that was. And then the sergeant from Store Street Station was saying that they're emotionally charged environments that they're going into, and people are kind of goading them to elicit a response. And I'm like, okay, but don't you have specialist training to deal with that kind of situation? Like, isn't the fact that you're a qualified member of the especially trained member of the riot squad evidence that you have gone through training that helps you not react in those kind of situations? Because obviously, like, they're still human. I'm not saying they should be total robots, but at the same time, aren't you trained for this?
Yeah, I mean, and kudos for the restraint on not mentioning the footage of you being pepper sprayed.
Oh, like, I just it happened. I don't really want to make myself the story, if that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, obviously it wasn't nice. I think it was wrong. I think it was unfair, but other people got it worse than me. So I'm not going to cry about it too much more.
I mean, I have a great deal of sympathy for the guards in general. It's a tough job. And ultimately, a lot of the time when the guards are doing certain actions, it's not their choice to be there. They've been told to be there and that they must act in a particular way. But I think particularly now when we're moving into universal body cams for guards as well, if I don't see any way that they could do this, that they could cut down on this more than the powers they already have, without stopping the general public from being able to record guards. And if you have a situation where if an incident happens, the guards have footage of it, but you legally can't,
Hmm.
that does not seem like a situation that's good from a civil liberties kind of perspective. Because I mean, then there's questions of, can you get the footage? Is it going to be given out fairly? And even just on a standard negotiating, it makes the guards much better positioned to just deny and stonewall whatever's happened, because they know you can't have any footage, and if you do, you can't share it.
Yeah, and like I have huge sympathy for the Gardaí as well. The ones that are being made, like, as I know, a lot of them are being made to do things that they feel completely at odds with. Some of them, at the end of the day, like, you can talk shit about the guards all you want, but at the end of the day, if your house gets broken into, you're still going to call them. So, do you know what I mean? I think it's unfair and unwise to try and tarnish the entire force when those orders are coming from the government, and Gardaí, who are men and women just like you and me and have kids and families and children, are being used to ram through deeply unpopular immigration policies that the government just seems completely, well, at least the previous government, maybe this one is slightly more willing to listen, in as far as the recent actions of the Minister for Justice go, at least. But yeah, it's just I think that they were, a lot of them, put in an unfair situation, but I think it's also unreasonable to delegitimize the deep upset that some of the public feel as regards to what's going on. I don't think you can have your cake and eat it in that situation.
just in relation to the Minister of Justice there and whether or not he's paying more attention to the immigration issue and the concerns about it, I've heard a lot of press about how he's going to be harder on these things and there's going to be more deportation orders. What I really want to see is the amount of deportation orders that are waived. So historically, what has happened is these orders are put out, then there's a local kind of pressure campaign to a TD. The TD goes to the Minister of Justice. The Minister of Justice has the right to waive a deportation order. And historically, you've had hundreds and hundreds of these orders waived. So it'll be very interesting to see if O'Callaghan is going to stop that and you're actually going to see more deportations, or whether or not the headline figures are going to go up, but they're just going to keep waiving all of them anyway. It doesn't matter if you give out 500 or 1,000 deportation orders if you then cancel, hundreds of them. So I think that'll be what'll be interesting to see, how he actually, once he's there for about a year and we can kind of FOI it and get information on it, what he's actually doing quietly in the background.
I think that's the thing. Like, we're not in a position to really see the fruits of what he's been saying yet. So, I think a lot of people might say that he couldn't possibly be more lax than the previous holder of that office. But yeah, it does remain to be seen. And also, like, are we still going to have voluntary deportation? Are there still going to be no exit checks? Like, I think that if the system were to function in line with the kind of promises that are being made, it might need some kind of tweaking here and there.
The point you make on voluntary deportation checks is a great one. And I had a lot of back and forth with the Department of Justice under McEntee about this. And for those who don't know, when you get a deportation order in Ireland, they assume you've left the country. But you don't have to tell anyone you're leaving the country. And when I went to the Department of Justice and I said, well, how do you know that these people have left the country? The response I got was, well, I mean, they would hardly stay, would they, after having received this order? And, we do occasionally call around to their registered address and, they're not there. They're like, right. So unless someone stays exactly where they were before, you have no way of finding out if they're still in the country or not.
Yeah, you're not their ex-boyfriend. Like, it's like you have to be more strict.
And there just seemed to be this sort of, do you think people would lie about that and not go? I'm like, yeah, that might happen with people who've illegally entered the country. They may continue to do illegal things.
Yeah, and I also seem to remember Ben asking Helen McEntee when she was in that office, how the same question essentially, and she said, well, look, like, they get cut off their social welfare, they've no way to make money, they have to go. I was like, Helen, black economy much? Like, come on, you can Google this.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a real sort of, what do you think people are going to do? Make money through criminal means?
No one does that.
They might do that, yeah. Just a farcical Minister for Justice. I wanted to go on to the McGregor event that was on yesterday with Tucker Carlson, but I did want to just mention one story just because it's so weird. RTE published a story today, yesterday, I think. And it was on, the headline was, Public Trust in RTE has fallen, but its value to Irish society has risen. And it basically said only 40% of the public rate RTE overall as trustworthy. Now, it's much higher if you only ask about news or current affairs. But the weird thing about this is the second paragraph is this. The figures were released under Freedom of Information by RTE to Dr. Mark Cullinan. So they have written an article on the fact that they released, through FOI, information to someone else, but they already had the information. So, I mean, I've published stories on FOIs that I've gotten from other organizations, but I've never went, I've decided to tell people information I've had for a year, and therefore this is a story. It's kind of bizarre. And then they say that they released it in the spirit of openness and transparency. You got FOI'd.
What an FOI.
Yeah. Well, you see, someone came to us with a legal system where we had to hand over information. And in the interest of openness and transparency, we gave it to them.
Yeah, that's like the Gardaí trying to slide into our DMs. Like, that's...
It's just a bizarre thing. It's like, someone FOI'd us about information they might do something with it. Let's just interview them and then publish as an article as if it's a thing we have done.
It's called getting ahead of the crisis, Gary.
I mean, yeah, but usually you don't have to admit that, oh yeah, by the way, we were forced to release this.
Yeah, oh, that's a funny one. But I'm just thinking, like, my brain, in my state of being not very well, my brain kind of did a bit of a Windows error sound there when you said that their trustworthiness has fallen in tandem with their value going up. That doesn't compute with me.
Yeah, so the thing about RTE, which is really weird, if you ask people about RTE, loads of people hate it. But if you start asking people about RTE news and particular RTE presenters, people are really supportive of them. So that's basically it. Basically, the news function of RTE, the TV news, the presenters that people know, basically bulk up RTE's public trust massively. But if you just ask them about RTE in the abstract, a load of people think it's crap. But if you're like, oh, what do you think of Brian Dobson? They're like, oh, Brian Dobson is great. I absolutely trust him.
I mean, that's just familiarity, though, isn't it? Like, I'm not suggesting that any of those presenters are like doing anything they shouldn't be, but in fairness, like, isn't that familiarity? Like, sometimes I see Anne Doyle in town, and I get excited because it's Anne Doyle.
I think it's familiarity, and also RTE's news presenters have been really good at basically not going on Twitter and staying kind of
Neutral.
separate from things.
Mm-hmm.
And a load of journalists don't do that, and then you see them on TV, and you're like, yeah, you say that, and that sounds reasonable, but I've seen your Twitter, and you're a pillock. Whereas they've just been very good at, like, they only turn up there, and they're well dressed, and they're presentable, and that's enough for most people. That's that is enough to say, okay, they look trustworthy.
It's like, show up, wear a suit, and don't say anything crazy.
That's people really underestimate the importance of just looking normal and not saying anything crazy. Like, you can get away with a lot as long as you say it in a very calm voice. I mean, that's the Green Party's success in a nutshell. They will propose something that is absolutely insane, but they're very well spoken, and it's all very soft, and they all look kind of, they're either in a suit or they're kind of hippie-ish. They don't look harmful. And then you're sort of going, why is everything like twice the price it was when they got into power?
And where are the wolves that you promised?
Where are the wolves that we were promised? A pertinent question. So, but I just wanted to mention that because it's just such a weird thing, and public trust in media has just shattered over the last 10 years. It's kind of incredible, and you see it all across Europe. And there's a load of stuff that when you bring this up with journalists, you get all this talk about misinformation and disinformation, and you don't get a lot of talk about, well, maybe you've done badly at your jobs. Maybe you have actually hurt people's trust in you through your actions. It's not because the Russians have convinced them that you're untrustworthy. It's because you act in a way which is untrustworthy.
No, like, I think it's easier to just gaslight the public and just be like, no, we're perfect all the time. And all these people are just, this is just a swamp. And there's nothing to see here. Don't look at us. Why would you look at us?
Yeah, or our finances, or any of the things like covering climate now we've switched up to. Yeah, what about that? Anyway, on to the thing I think people probably want to know more about. McGregor and his meeting with Tucker Carlson, and then what seemed to have been quite the party in his in one of his pubs. Were you about for that, or did you see much on that? Because I know you wrote it up, but I actually don't know what you were doing.
Yeah, I actually went. I went. I saw the tweet, and then a couple of acquaintances were going. So I thought, like, it's a Tuesday. Tuesdays are usually dull. YOLO, I'm going to spice it up. And we headed in. Unfortunately, I missed Tucker Carlson. Apologies. I missed him. I think he had been walking around the city centre with his people, and I think also Conor McGregor as well. And then they had gone back to the Black Forge for a break, and I don't think he stayed too long because I think he had his wife with him or something like that. But yeah, no, I missed Tucker. That was a long-winded way of saying that I missed him. Although I was speaking to McGregor himself, who said that he had an interview. They had an interview, quite a lengthy interview, I think like kind of 1.5 hour sort of length, which it's probably coming out either today or tomorrow. And that they had spoken about the immigration situation in Ireland. Like, it sounded like it was a bit of a long elaboration on some of the points that he made at the White House last month. So I think that's going to be on Carlson's platform if people want to see it. Yeah, the party itself was lively, it's quite lighthearted. Like, people, there was quite a few familiar faces, a lot of journos buzzing around. There were a lot of, ex commentators, few politicians. I saw Owen Lenihan there. Good few people. I saw Glenn Moore, formerly of the Irish Freedom Party. Yeah, there's a good buzz. I think the Telegraph were over from the UK. There was quite a lot of energy surrounding it.
I mean, you've talked to McGregor. How serious is he about this presidential thing? Does he actually intend to run, or is this just because he wants to bring attention to other issues and he knows if he keeps saying he'll run, then people will pay attention to it in the context of that?
It's hard to say, like, not knowing the man, it's hard to say what his precise motivations are. But, like, if it is to get attention, then he's doing a great job at it.
I mean, yeah, an interview with Tucker Carlson, even with Carlson off Fox, he still has an absolutely massive reach.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I was speaking to his people who were at the Black Forge, and they were saying that, since the fiasco with Fox happened, it almost feels like the leash is off and they can have more creative freedom. And also, I think they were saying that, while it's quite difficult to gauge exactly how many people are watching you on a platform like X, because the views don't really, it doesn't really tell you if somebody just scrolled past it or if they actually expanded and watched. But they were saying that, because it's on X, it's not on a cable network anymore. It's more, it's reaching a lot of younger people, a younger audience, as well as perhaps a more intentional audience that are seeking it out, rather than somebody who's just kind of vegged out on their sofa and turns on Fox.
hmm. No, it'd be interesting to see what way this goes. I know that obviously there's a big debate about how helpful this sort of thing is to any kind of right wing or anti immigration movement in Ireland. On one hand, obviously, getting the Americans to pay attention is useful. But then there's a question of, is this a helpful use of energy in the national sense? I mean, do you have any read on that?
It's hard. Like, I was actually speaking to a journalist friend of mine about that, and we were just discussing. Like, he asked me, like, do you think that Tucker Carlson coming over is a big deal for Irish people? And I was like, I mean, honestly, I don't think most Irish people know who Tucker Carlson is. And that's not a diss on Carlson. It's just a fact. Like, I probably wouldn't know who a prominent media commentator in Australia is. Like, if it's not something that you engage with, then I don't see why, it will be something that was quite impactful for you. I mean, look, when the interview comes out and there's actually, a household name like Conor McGregor attached to the interview, then, like, maybe their interest will peak. But I'm not sure.
Hmm. I think obviously what part of the problem here is the recent case against McGregor, the civil case on sexual assault, and I know that's being appealed. Do we have any idea when that appeal is going to go through? I understand they're trying to get new evidence in, so maybe it goes a different way for him. Do you think it's likely that will happen relatively quickly? And I suppose if that happens, and if the finding, if he wins on appeal, do you think that kind of clears some of that taint away from him, or do you think that the damage to his reputation is done? And there's a section of the population who, regardless of what the courts say, is just going to say he's a scumbag.
Yeah, I think there's, I'd have to answer that question in several parts. I think that we did speak quite briefly about his intention to appeal. And, I can't go into detail really on what he said, but he did seem very confident that the new evidence that he says he has is solid.
Mhm.
I can say that much. Um, Timeline, I don't know. I'm not really sure. I think it's still in the stages of kind of hashing out what the grounds of appeal are. Um, if he did overturn that decision, and if he did clear his name, as it were, uh, that's the thing with news stories, isn't it? It's like, even with cases like defamation cases, even if somebody is eventually found vindicated and it's found that like whatever was said about them was absolutely false, there will always be a section of society that believes that it's true. If you look at the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case, for example, there are still people who are like, I'm with Amber. Do you know what I mean? Like, even though the court has established that Depp was innocent, and if the world was perfect, that would mean that everyone believes him, and they're all like, "Oh, sorry, Johnny," but like that's not really how people are.
But he's confident that he'll be able to fight against this.
He seems to have great confidence in the new evidence that he says he has.
Okay. Excellent. There's just one quick thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap up, unless anyone has any comments or anything they want us to go through. And it's one of those subjects that I care about, but I'm not sure anyone else does. We wrote an editorial there on the central bank. The central bank bought a sculpture for €616,000. And people have been complaining about the cost of this, that this is a terrible waste of money. And it is. But we need to talk about the real issue. It's hideous.
It's ugly.
It's terrible. And we're getting all of this money. Now, if you have one of these large projects, there's a requirement that you actually have pieces of art in it in order to get the planning permission. So we keep getting these public art pieces, but they're all terrible. They're not about the country or the culture or celebrating anything about Ireland. They're just crap. Like, the central bank one is a series of colored tubes.
If you haven't seen it, it reminds me of a swing set that I had when I was a very small child. And eventually, as my cousin and I got bigger and heavier, we broke it. So the swing parts came off. And the bars were just left in the garden for years and years and years with no swings. And that's what this looks like.
It's kind of incredible. And they keep doing this. They keep putting up these terrible art pieces that if you're very lucky, you can they're kind of forgettable, which this is. Like, you walk by it and you just forget it's there. But we're spending millions upon millions on just crap art. And, if it was nice art, I would actually probably be a little bit okay with it. Like something good, like the statue of Cuchulainn in the GPO. Something like that. Build that. I would happily see public money spent on that, as opposed to another bloody mural or something like that.
Yeah, some of the stuff that passes for art these days, it's so utterly bizarre that you start to believe the people who say it's being done deliberately to just make you feel depressed. And I think you can see it on screen now. What is that?
Just for those that is 10.5 by 14 meters in size. Like, it is massive. And just awful. But anyway, people did not come here to hear our critiques. So I think we will wrap it up for the day. We will be back next week and at about the same time. As always, it's been a pleasure. If you have any feedback or anything you'd like us to talk about next week, send it on to gary@gript.ie and I'll take it into consideration. But until then, all the best and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.